Welcome to Four Quarter Lives, a podcast exploring the profound impact of longer lives and careers on everything: countries, companies, couples, and careers. I'm Avivah Wittenberg-Cox, and on this week's Four Quarter Lives, I republish a conversation I had with Chip Conley, founder of the Modern Elder Academy, former head of hospitality at Airbnb, and one of the most original thinkers on what midlife is actually for. The looking period has no good PR. It doesn't photograph well. It's not a transformation story yet. It's just the uncomfortable bit in the middle where you've left something and haven't arrived anywhere. Our culture is allergic to it. Chip has been there. He left a career at the top of the hospitality world, a company he'd built from nothing that had defined him for decades, and walked into not knowing. What he found on the other side became the Modern Elder Academy, a rethinking of midlife as a time of becoming rather than diminishing, and a body of work that's changed how a lot of people understand what Q3 is actually for. This conversation is the second in phase 2 of mapping the new Q3, the part of the series where we're sitting with the 4 L's. Last week, leaving. This week, looking. And Chip knows this territory better than almost anyone. Chip, thank you so much for taking the time.
Avivah, listen, I know we're going to have fun. So I don't know if anybody will listen to this. I think they will. A lot of people will. But I said yes to this immediately because I just know that we have a lot in common, a lot of common interests.
Absolutely. And I should, flag that this is not going to be an unbiased interview since I'm an avid supporter, follower, admirer of my chief inspiration officer, Chip Conley. You've been well ahead of me on this journey and dragged me along. So I am constantly getting inspiration, not only from what you say, but also what you do. And we'll talk a lot about that.
Thank you.
Okay, let's start with the crux of what I think you're doing and gifting to the world, which is rebranding midlife.
Yeah.
Let's start with why it got such a bad rap in the first place.
I mean, you have an educated listener group, so I'm going to give a little bit of context to this. There are 3 life stages that actually developed in the 20th century. Adolescence really wasn't a word until 1904 when a book came out with that name. And we said, oh yeah, kids don't become adults until they're 18, not when they hit puberty. And then adolescence got a lot of love. Retirement got a lot of love starting in the 1930s as a way to get older people out of the workplace so younger people with a 25% unemployment rate could get a job. And then we had pensions and Social Security and AARP and retirement communities. The 3rd life stage was midlife. And the reason midlife really became a thing was because longevity was 47 in the year 1900, and it became 77 by the year 2000. So midlife really wasn't a thing in the 19th century. It became a thing in the 20th century, a life stage. And weirdly, in the mid-1960s, a Canadian psychologist who wasn't very well known wrote a white paper about the midlife crisis. He had only studied men, and not even that many of them. And that just hit. And so whereas adolescence and retirement have gotten a lot of government love and social support, and usually the Hallmark cards that you get for someone at those ages is very fawning. But the Hallmark cards you get at age 40, 50, 60, maybe even 70 are sort of embarrassing. And so there's a brand attached to midlife that speaks to the idea that sort of the old Hollywood trope of, and it's mostly focused on man. You hit your mid-40s, you actually want to go, you're sort of in middlescence, but you want to go back to adolescence. So you get a red Ferrari and you have an affair. And very few people.
Was that ever true? Was that ever relevant?
I mean, ever means like anybody ever. And yes, the answer is true. Yes, people have had that experience. Yes, the Canadian psychologists who came up with the midlife crisis sort of said that's something that can happen, but it's really rare. I mean, you don't see a lot of people who just sort of like all of a sudden lose their mind, like Kevin Spacey in American Beauty, where he just, he sort of loses his mind in midlife. I like to think of midlife not as a crisis, but as a chrysalis. If you think about the caterpillar to butterfly journey, the chrysalis is the midlife for the butterfly. It's where it gets dark and gooey and solitary, but it's also where the transformation happens. And literally the word metamorphosis sort of really speaks to this idea of that journey. And the U curve of happiness research suggests that maybe midlife is the time where we're sort of a little bit in a darker lower point, because 45 to 50 is the low point of life satisfaction for adults. But we get happier in our 50s, 60s, 70s, and women in their 80s.
So what's with the 35 to 50 low point? What do you attribute that to? You see all these people come to you.
Yeah. We have the Modern Elder Academy, also known as MEA, and the average age of people coming is 54, but we have a lot of people who are younger than 50, and 1 out of every 6 people who come is a millennial. I think what's going on for people between 35 and 50, which is what I call early midlife, is this sense that your expectations of what you thought you were going to get in life aren't matching up to the reality. So disappointment equals expectations minus reality. So that's one thing.
Like your equations. I love you. Have a whole book.
Thank you. I have a whole book, Emotional Equations, exactly. So the idea that your expectations aren't living up to what you thought they were going to be, or the reality isn't living up to your expectations. So that's one issue. A second issue is we are really taught from teenage years on, we accumulate knowledge, accumulate friends, accumulate responsibilities, accumulate people we date, accumulate kids, jobs, etc. And so by 35 to 50, you are carrying a lot of accumulation. And it's around that time, especially like later 40s, I would say, like 45 to 50, that it's time to start doing what we call at MEA, the Great Midlife Edit. Because the first half of your life is really about accumulation, and the second half of life is about discernment that can lead to editing what's not working for you, editing mindsets that don't help you, etc. So I'd say that's another thing that's going on. And I think Brené Brown captured this in an essay she wrote long ago, and she shared with me, because we've been friends for a while. It was called Midlife Unraveling. And when I heard her say this, I was like, really? That's a terrible thing. Unraveling sounds like you're losing your mind. And she said, Chip, if you look in the dictionary under the word ravel, it means something so tightly wound, you can't get it undone. So your life can sometimes feel so tightly wound in your late 40s, let's say, that you can't get it undone. And so the word that we hear a lot at MEA is stuck. Someone feels stuck.
Yep.
So I think that if you're lucky in your 35 to 50 in the early midlife period, you learn how to start unsticking yourself. And then between 50 and 60, which I think is the core of midlife, you start to actually feel some newfound freedom. And you start to say, like, okay, I'm editing things, and I'm like, wow, I'm finding a little time affluence maybe. And then from 60 to 75, which I'm 63, and I still, that midlife, I think, goes to 75. And especially in a world in which we're living to more and often 90 to 100 than we used to. So 60 to 75 is the later midlife. And it's really when you're making the sense of what's next for yourself. And in an era knowing that after 75, your life changes pretty dramatically after 75. There's some good parts to it, but there's actually some really challenging parts to it, especially health-wise.
So I really like that breakdown of midlife into those 3 subtler stages, early, middle, and then later midlife, because adulthood hasn't been much research. I mean, there's much, much more research on early childhood, and everything up till 14 is bit-sized, broken down. And then you've got this long expanse of adulthood. So you're actually going to break down midolescence basically from 35 to 75 into these.
Yeah, I would say, so I'm sorry, I think midolescence, which so childhood is from 0 to 18 or 0 to 17. Adolescence is a period of that. I actually think midolescence is a period of midlife. Again, now we're getting so...
we love subtlety. Go.
We're so geeky.
So geeky on this. It's not funny.
Because if adolescence is that period of life when you're going through hormonal, emotional, physical, and identity transitions. When are you going through hormonal, emotional, identity, and physical transitions? You're doing it maybe through all of midlife, but especially around, for women, menopause, for men, andropause, and that can vary for about a 15-year period, let's say from 40, or actually maybe 20-year period, from 40 to 60 or so. So I think midolescence is really sort of that era. So I wouldn't consider midolescence necessarily 65 or 70 necessarily, or 35. Okay. But I would consider it
a middle bit, the transformational bit.
I think the ultimate midolescence ritual that happens, or rites of passage that happen, is for women with menopause. And that is, just with, it's the adult corollary of adolescence. You start your puberty, you start that at adolescence, and you end it at the end of midolescence. So that's how I would look at it.
Okay. I like that. We're going to catalog that in the annals of the definitions of midlife, which will last. Mark, you're so good with slogans and equations, and you metaphorize as you breathe. I really like it as somebody who's very attached to metaphor. So if you were doing an ad campaign for midlife, which you sort of are, what would be the tagline? And I pulled out of your wonderful new book, Learning to Love Midlife, 12 Reasons Why Life Gets Better with Age. I pulled out this quote: "You've learned to love Brussels sprouts and classical music. Maybe it's time to learn to love midlife." I could see that kind of plastered on the highways in LA.
Well, I think there's something to that. I mean, it's like, there's things that you didn't like when you're younger, and then you start to actually gain an appreciation for it. And
like your parents.
Like your parents, yes, or what they did for you, for sure. If I were to rebrand midlife, my simple rebranding would be take it from midlife crisis to midlife chrysalis. And the reason I say that is because the wordplay is so good, but it's also really accurate. Because I don't want to diminish the idea that, the U-curve of happiness does show 45 to 50 is the low point. And sometimes it's on either side. Your mileage may vary. So it might be from 40 to 55. That is a low point. It's not like a crisis, but it's a low point. And yet we get like the butterfly emerges from that chrysalis. And it emerges as a happier, not healthier always, but happier, wiser, often more purposeful and more free person. And so I think I like chrysalis. I also love other pieces of language. I love pro-aging. I love that language about saying that we are in an era where we need to balance the anti-aging message, the anti-aging industrial complex, with a pro-aging message. Because as Becca Levy knows, as you know, when in her research she showed that, when people shift their mindset from a negative to a positive on aging, they gain 7.5 years of additional life, which is frankly more additional life than just about any kind of physical thing you could do. Yep. Stopping smoking, starting exercising. So
Think positive. It'll save you 7.5 years.
Yeah. I mean, it's not easy. You have to, we have a ageism bias in our society. I mean, there's a lot of messaging that's ageist. So in order to have a pro-aging perspective, we need public service announcements that say, hey, life does get better with age in many ways. So
I always like to say we got to kind of unleash the old. So you're talking about, I love words, as do you. I'd love to reclaim old as a word. Yes. You like pussy or queer or crone or all these other words that we pulled off the no-go show.
Actually, back in the civil rights era, pre-Black is beautiful, Black was actually a derogatory term. Yankee was a derogatory term to the Brits called the colonists. Redneck was a derogatory term. So yes, I think old is a term that we should reclaim. I also think elder. Elder's not elderly. Now, Modern Elder as a name, if I could do it all over again, I probably wouldn't call it Modern Elder Academy because it confuses people. Because people think, oh, everybody's going to be 80 years old there. Yeah. It's not the Modern Elderly Academy. It's the Modern Elder Academy. And the reason it's called that is because when I was at Airbnb as the Modern Elder, twice the age of the average person there, and the in-house mentor to the founders, they told me a Modern Elder, I was 52 at the time, so I was not elderly. They said a modern elder is someone who's as curious as they are wise. And when I heard that, I said, I want to be that when I grow up. So yes. So I think both those words.
Can we turn old into gold?
Yeah, I think we can. If you look out in the world, something that's aged is, aged beef is something that's more expensive. Aged leather is, more comfortable. An old pair
wine,
of
all kinds of
old wine, old Levi's. I mean, there's something that's comfortable. And so yes, and look at an old growth forest, as I say in the book. Why don't we think about old growth humans? We somehow think that old.
I like old growth humans.
Old growth humans, just because you're old doesn't mean you're growing. Like aging and growing are the same thing. Yeah. We don't think of it that way. We think you're growing when you're 15 and you're aging when you're 35. And you're aged when you're 75. So aging is aged, past tense. Aged's maybe not as good.
That's a different word entirely.
Aging is better than aged. Okay, but that's fine.
So I'm curious now that you and I, because I'm only a year behind you, are heading into this last part of midlife.
Yes.
How are you and how are you thinking about the transition into what I call Q4? Is that
yes.
final quarter of life, unless the biohackers get us, and then we'll get 5 quarters despite the mathematical problem.
Well, yeah, or you'll make each quarter longer. You'll have the bonus round or the yeah. Listen, for me, it depends on how long you're going to live. If you think you're going to live to 100, then you could say 75 to 100 would be the fourth quarter. But if you live to 80, it's 60 to 80. How do you look at it, Avivah? I mean, like,
I roughly use just the mathematical quarter, 75 to 100, because by 75, statistically, a lot more people were going to feel their bodies a bit more. We're not quite prepared yet for that kind of aging. We're not quite muscled up. So that's, I think, when people start at least saying that they're noticing some.
Yes, exactly. So you and I are about exactly halfway through quarter 3.
Yeah.
Which I think is a really productive quarter. I mean, life begins at 50. I believe that in many ways.
I do too. Totally.
Prior to that, life was a dress rehearsal, and it doesn't mean it didn't matter. It just meant it sort of prepared you for what was going to come after 50, which is a shocking thought because, people think like, oh, after 50, you're going out to pasture and you're going to you retire and you're going to spend 30 years just watching TV. And like, thank you. And
I love that exercise you do of making people take the first 18 years off.
That's right.
Of their age and then tracking where in their adulthood they are, because it makes a big difference. Let people around.
Let's do that exercise for a second. So the average age of a person who comes to MEA, we've had 4,400 people from 47 countries come to our Baja campus, and soon we will have our Santa Fe, New Mexico campus open on 2,600 acres. It's a beautiful place. So the average age of people who come to MEA is 54. The average age that they think they're going to live till is 90. And so the math is really interesting. 54 is exactly halfway between 18 when you became an adult and 90 when you die. Most people at age 54 do not think they're halfway through their adult life, assuming we consider adulthood all the way till you die. You don't think that way. And when you say like, oh my God, I've got half of my adult life left, it opens you up to starting to ask questions like, how am I saving for that? What's something new I can learn? There's things that I have put off that are important that I probably will never do unless I say that it now. One of my favorite questions to ask at MEA and in the book is 10 years from now, what will you regret if you don't learn it or do it now? Because anticipated regret is a form of wisdom. And to be able to feel like, oh my gosh, when I asked that question at 57, living in Mexico part-time, I said, well, gosh, at 67, 10 years from now, it will not be any easier to learn how to surf nor to learn Spanish. So at age 57, even though I felt too old on some level, mindset-wise, to start learning a language or learning to surf, I did. I started that. And so I think one of the things that's really important is how do we curate questions for people in midlife that wake them up, hope that, and inspire them to look at their life differently than maybe their parents did, or maybe societal norms do. And, I think the programs at Harvard and Stanford, you went to Harvard, ALI, Stanford DCI, these midlife transition schools at universities are a really great opportunity for people to go out and imagine, what do you want to do? How do you want to make a difference in the world? What's your legacy, etc. Or for some people, it's not even about legacy. It's about what's the kind of stuff in your life that you put on hold because starting at age 22, you became a responsible wage earner. And at age 27, you had children and you had more children and more children. And then you ended up at age 55, a little bit lost because, oh, wow. And there were all these dreams. I mean, we have a beautiful story, a quick story. A litigation attorney, she's 60 years old, very successful, hated her job, hated what litigation did to her on an emotional level, but had no clue what to do next because she did not want to retire. She came to MEA and she came thinking that there's an adjacent portfolio career for her. It's similar to
just a little pivot. Yeah,
exactly. And that happens a lot. I mean, that's the easy ones. But in her case, she didn't want to pivot. She didn't like the whole world she was living in. And by the end of the week, she realized, based upon some of the questions we asked and some opportunity to have space, to have a midlife atrium, to imagine and reflect upon what she really wanted, she realized that the thing that she loved the most as a teenager was hanging out with her grandma in the kitchen making pies. And she realized that as an adult, whenever she'd be traveling, she would go to see a bakery. She'd do a little, more recently do a Google search the last 20 years or so, do a Google search and say like, okay, what's the best bakery in town? And she'd go and she'd smell and she'd like get this tingly when she'd smell. And so by the end of the week, she decided, I'm going to actually spend 3 months going to pastry chef school see if I like it. If I do, I'm quitting my job and I'm going to actually create a bakery in my neighborhood because the bakery in my neighborhood closed during COVID. And I was like, that's what she's doing now. So to me, that's for, my legacy is having stories like that and having influenced and impacted people, the ROI of ripples of impact in a way that help people to see they have more options than they thought they did.
That's a great story. And I do love those kind of wild reinventions. They're very inspiring. But the reality, as you and I know, and as Arthur Brooks, that I know has really researched, is that there are two realities of aging. There's this uplifting story, and then there's still a majority of people who are not doing very, very well. And you're trying very much to address the first. You've created MEA, I love this idea of the first wisdom school. I'm curious what you've learned about how hard is it an idea to sell? How you've been on this for a number of years now.
Yeah.
How able are people to embrace the phase, men and women?
Yeah, it's a good question.
Resistance?
Yeah, so we're the world's first midlife wisdom school. We're not for everybody. And you're right. There are some people who are fixed mindset and or health issues and or life obligations that just preclude them from participating at all. I mean, including our online programs, which are very accessible price-wise, as well as doing it from your home. We also have financial aid. So we don't want, if someone really wants to come to a workshop, we don't want them to feel like they can't. I think one of the things that distinguishes us versus the Nexel collaborative programs like Harvard and Stanford
is super expensive.
We're very accessible. I mean, we want elementary school teachers and firemen to come to our program too. But what I will say is that some of the challenges we have, first of all, wisdom is an abstract concept. I love it. I think wisdom is trending, and I think, knowledge is commoditizing. And in the world, the era of AI, wisdom will become more valuable because knowledge is a commodity. But I think we're sort of early in that process. I mean, just like Peter Drucker in 1959 was very early when he said knowledge workers will rule the world. No one knew what he was talking about. And I talk about wisdom workers, and no one knows what I'm talking about. So, and midlife is, say we're a midlife wisdom school, it's like, oh, well, okay. And I'll actually call ourselves Modern Elder Academy, like, oh, elder, like, so thank God we have people who love coming to our program. I mean, our hardest thing was really opening and saying, like, will ever anybody come to this? People come and they have generally speaking, a pretty great experience. And then they tell people, and we get a lot of press. And part of the reason I wrote this book was to make sure we get the word out. But who's it hard for that I think it's well suited for? Harder for men than women. 62% of the people who come are women. So men are less inclined. Why is that? Because men don't do personal growth workshops as much as women, just in general, at any age. Secondly, they don't want to be vulnerable. Thirdly, quite frankly, a lot of men are really stuck in their 50s and they have a hard time admitting it. And unfortunately, the suicide rate, which used to be 5 times greater, is now 4 times greater in terms of men versus women. So unfortunately, some people, I had lost 5 male friends to suicide, ages 42 to 52 during the Great Recession. So sometimes that, instead of a workshop, they do that. And that's, obviously, I want to make sure that workshops are much safer and healthier alternative. But yeah, we wouldn't be growing into some
I think that's not a good marketing line, right?
No, I promise you.
A safe alternative to suicide is an MEA. Yeah, it's not going to fly.
Yeah, and we also are very careful. If someone's coming and they are in that level of emotional state, in the application, in the interview, or there's no interview necessarily. We do an interview if we think one's necessary, but in the application, if it's a little odd, we'll find out and make sure that they know, if they really need suicide prevention, we're not the place to come. Yeah. But there are a lot of people who are really stuck though. And being really stuck, it might be the first step to being depressed, which might be the next step to being, very lonely and then feeling like you don't have any alternatives. So long story short is, we wouldn't be moving and growing into Santa Fe if we didn't have a lot of confidence that there is a large market, but also a large need. So I've spent most of my life finding markets and needs, like consumer needs, and filling them. This one feels more like finding a societal need and filling it. And that's part of the reason I'm very committed to having so much financial aid available, because I've not paid myself in the 6 years that, we're doing this. I'm lucky. I did well in my life financially, and therefore I can make this available. And So I know it's needed. Sometimes people don't know they need it, though. That's part of it. I know they are.
You can add horse to water, but
and it's just, there's so many excuses. I'm like, oh yeah, I just don't have time. Like, okay, that's fine. All right. If someone could think of it as a transformational travel vacation, or maybe even like, hey, you've been reading a lot about Peter Attia and Mark Hyman, and you're sort of obsessed with biohacking. Like, this is a form of longevity travel. This, even Blue Zones is a partner of ours. We're doing 4 Blue Zones workshops a year, not 2 this year, but after
biohacking. That would be a good name for your program.
Oh, I know, but we're not biohacking.
I know you're not, but it would get
I got to come up with it. I'll think about that. What's a rhyme?
Male branded, male attractive language to
yes, yeah. Biohacking is all about the men, and so yeah.
Strengthening, well, we're not going there. So your book, your 12 lessons that you address in Learning to Love Midlife, roughly address the key transitions of midlife, the physical, relational, temporal, professional, and the spiritual, which is very much how you designed your online program, which I am an alumni of and really appreciate. Yes. It was really structured. It was very complete. But I hear it's ending. You've just announced you're doing your last one, which created this flurry of subscriptions, I hear. Yeah. What's going on?
Yeah, I'll tell you what our plan was, and I'll tell you what it may turn into, because we were sort of in the evolution stage of it. The plan was we would do a navigating transitions, a 6-week workshop. So it's both a combination of asynchronous learning on your computer and then Zoom calls that were, very engaged in breakout sessions. And, we call it digital intimacy. And there was something to it because
little pods of 8 people that learn.
That you learn with a pod of people together. And it worked really well. And yet over time, post-COVID, the numbers of people signing up were declining and we were teaching it more. So the number, instead of having 350 people in the group, we had 150 people in the group. Right. So, and we have an 8-week purpose course, and we've had some other courses as well. So we said, okay, well, maybe with the fact that we're doing lots more workshops now, we just should wind this down and purely do the async part of the course. So not do the live part of the course as well. And so people can do on demand, sign up for the Navigating Transitions course, and you go through it yourself. And then once a month, there would be a community cafe where you could connect with other people. That was the theory. Then we put it out, okay, this is our last, live course. For 500 people sign up. And I was like, okay, there's still a lot of demand out there. And so what we may do is, instead of doing 2 transitions courses a year and 2 purpose courses a year, we might do just 1 each and keep it at that, because it is a good product. So you don't want to sort of wind down a product that actually people have enjoyed. But what we were finding, I did this earlier, quite honestly, is the sheer volume of our marketing time and dollars that we're going to selling our online program, which represents, about 5% of our revenues, was staggering relative to what we need to do and spend for our workshop programs, especially as we're opening our Santa Fe campus. So the good news for you, Avivah, is that I think that this was not a ploy either. I can be really honest. Our budget for this year pretty much assumed that this was our last one. So we're honored that a lot of people signed up, more than 50% greater than anything we'd ever had before, on this workshop on this online course that just started at the end of February. Okay,
so listeners, if you missed it, this is not your last chance, and you might get another opportunity next year. It is a really good program. It's probably the best thing I've seen out there in terms of just a very complete foundational course on what this particular transition is all about. So really,
we're proud because YPO, Young Presidents Organization, has privately branded with us to okay, we want our version of that. So we have seen that the B2B market of people saying, oh yeah, this is good. Let's do this for our constituency, which has been great. So yeah, it's encouraging. And so thank you.
So let me flip now to another form of your role modeling, because I think you've been a role model in a lot of areas. But one of the ones that I find almost most shocking is, in addition to, the pioneering you did in the hotelier space and the mentoring startup space as a modern elder, in the aging space, now in the creation of these regenerative communities you're building all over the place in Mexico and Santa Fe. Yeah. One of the things I most admire is your astonishing willingness to be so open about the hard stuff you've been hit with in life. Yeah. And it feels like you're exploring it with us generously in your unbelievably daily blogs, your writing, your educational push, and you cover a lot of things. I mean, you've talked about suicide, incarceration, race, prostate cancer. I've learned more than I ever thought I would.
Oh, God, more than you wanted to learn. According to my mom, TMI, Chip, too much information.
You've had and shared one hell of a ride and your share of life quakes. But tell me about your roots. I don't know anything about. So you just mentioned your mom. Where were you born? Yes. What kind of family? And what impact have they had on this whole journey?
Yeah. So I grew up in Southern California in a place called Long Beach. And I was the firstborn of two firstborn parents. So both of my parents went to Stanford. They were both firstborn in their families. I was the only son, two younger sisters. I was chipped off the old block because I was Stephen Townsend Conley Jr., so Stephen II. And I grew up in a family that was very conservative, very private, pretty much tried to be the American dream family. We were, middle to upper middle class, but I actually went to junior high school and high school in the inner city because we were in a district. Long Beach is a very diverse place. Actually, where Snoop Dogg, I went to his high school, but I went to the same. So Snoop Dogg and Cameron Diaz went to high school together, and I went to high school about 10 years ahead of them. And so I loved that. I loved the cultural curiosity of being in a place where I was a minority as a white guy. And I went to college at Stanford and graduate school of business at Stanford. And then a couple of years after that, I started my boutique hotel company, and that was off to the races as an entrepreneur. So I would say that much of my upbringing was complicated by the fact that my father was a Marine captain in the reserves, very traditional, pretty tough guy. I was his only son. I was a great athlete, which helped, and I was a great student. But my dad didn't want to be my dad when I grew up necessarily. I love my dad now. I mean, we're really close. But back then I found him to be a bit of a hothead, meaning he had a temper and he was sort of a jerk at times. And so I liked writing, and he made me feel badly about being a writer because he felt like that was sort of not a practical thing and it was sort of effeminate. I was like, I should have told him, well, Ernest Hemingway is not effeminate. But long story short is it was in business school when I was 22 and I was working for Morgan Stanley, and running on that treadmill that I came out as a gay man, which was a big step because I had pretty much walked through my high school, college, and graduate school years in my dad's footsteps. Now, I was more successful than he was, which he was proud of. And yet when I came out to him at 22 that I was a gay man, his biggest worry was that I would be a florist or an interior designer. And I'm like, no, Dad, I'm still pretty ambitious. I mean, I could be an ambitious florist or designer too. In fact, I'm married to an interior designer who's very ambitious and successful. So long story short is what I had to do is I had to start going on my own path. And I did. And thank God I did that at age 22 because it served me well. And I have been, as you called me earlier, a pioneer. I have not had a discomfort being a pioneer. I have had some, and luckily I lived in the Bay Area for a long time, which is full of pioneers, and it sort of attracts pioneers by nature. But I think coming out at age 22 was part of that pioneer. And more recently, I've been a bit of a pioneer with my blog talking about my prostate cancer, stage 3 prostate cancer, and all of the experiences of bodily experiences, like, stuff that, you don't necessarily want to read. Although, I do think that you're right. My healing process was to communicate about this. And for some people, not that many, but my mom definitely, I don't necessarily I want to hear all of this, Chip. I want to read your positive things. I don't want to read about, sort of existential thoughts in your head around, mortality or about the physical effects of radiation. I did 36 sessions of radiation 3 days before I had my 36th session, 3 days before I was on Good Morning America, and then 2 days later, the Today Show. So I really needed to process this because I was going through a lot. I mean, it's enough to go through all that, but I was also had a very good book come out, and I was launching the Santa Fe Ranch, which is huge. So, I learned a long time ago, your is your secrets. And whether that's some people may not like that term, that phrase, but I like it because it allows me to realize that when I'm needing to process something, it's helping me to heal. And what I've learned, especially from this most recent journey through prostate cancer, is I am saying a lot of things in my blog that a lot of men need to hear, who are like, let me use an example. You lose your libido, maybe it will come back, but I'm on hormone depletion therapy. I have 1% of my normal testosterone. I have no libido, and I haven't had a libido for 2 or 3 years now. And that, to be able to talk about that is
revolutionary for men.
Well, it's just like menopause 10 or 15 years ago when women started talking about it more. It was revolutionary to talk as a man about like your libido going down. You don't have to have prostate cancer to have libido issues. I mean, look at the little blue pill that, Viagra, that is a huge multi-billion-dollar business. So to be able to talk about that and say, you know what, this is what I'm going through, I think it really helped a lot of men, because men often don't process these things.
Yeah, and I think that's the role modeling. Women have had a lot of role modeling recently on midlife and menopause and change and transition. Yeah. I think men have had a lot less, and I think that's an extraordinary gift. So this one time, don't listen to him.
Thank you.
Heather, I said so.
All right.
I'm going to conclude. We're running out of time. Will you start a wisdom school for later life?
Listen, I think, if midlife is this bridge between early adulthood and later adulthood, I would love people to, we have this guy, Jim Flaherty, who came to MEA twice last year at age 87 and 88. And at 87, he learned how to surf. So we do not say you have to be 35 to 75 to come to MEA. We had, 25-year-olds come as well. So long story short is, I hope MEA can be seen as something that someone in later life could use. What we have at MEA for our alumni is there's a group called the Third Act, and that group is an affinity group that has Zoom calls every once in a while. But I think having more workshops that are more oriented toward people who are 70 and older is going to be something we're going to do now that we're in Santa Fe. Frankly, Santa Fe is full of a lot of people who are older. So there's going to be a real opportunity there too. I will be watching your own transition in that space, because I think it's a big transition too that we don't talk about much, and we don't know because people never have shared how they feel going through it. That's right.
I know, Chip, that you will share.
I will. Well, you and I will be going through the ages on the
we'll compare notes.
Yeah, exactly.
My podcast is 4 quarter lives, and I often ask people to metaphorize each of their quarters. If you were going to put a metaphor to your 4 quarters, what would they be?
Okay, so I'm going to say, wow,
Q1, Q2, Q3.
Yeah. So Q1 would be riding a bike. The metaphor would be learning how to ride a bike. You need the training wheels to get started, and then you start getting the hang of it, and then you start going a little crazy on the bike. And there's a sense of just the freedom of being on a bike and seeing your skill set build over time. Yeah. So I think riding a bike is maybe Q1. Q2 is a tough one. Q2 is weightlifting. So it's learning, I have said before that I think as we get into midlife and later midlife, you learn how to move from the weight of the world to the wonder of the world. But I think that 25 to 50, Q2 is feeling the weight of the world and learning how to become a weightlifter, because otherwise you'll be crushed by the weight. And there's the weight of expectations, the weight of obligations, the weight of sandwich generation, etc. Q3, I'll just go back to the chrysalis. I think Q3 is the chrysalis. It's emerging from the chrysalis and being able to be in a place where you can pollinate your wisdom in the world at an age where people are still, from a career perspective, are still perceived as being productive in the workplace, which you do after in Q4 as well, but it's rare. And then Q4, gosh, the metaphor would be, I don't know, the wise person at a campfire. Maybe the old elder who doesn't say a lot, but when they do speak, everybody leans in because the elder has a softer voice. And when they talk, everybody wants to hear every single syllable. So yeah, I guess those are off the cut.
I think those are pretty good. Riding a weightlifting, chrysalis pollinating, and then the campfire's wise elder. Chip, I think you've done all of those, and I look forward to leaning in with you.
Thank you.
The warmth of a warm fire in Santa Fe.
I look forward to that too, Avivah. Thank you so much.
Thank you. What a wonderful voyage you've taken us on to your later phase midlife.
Thank you.
Chip talks about the looking period as something you have to earn your way through rather than think your way out of. I keep coming back to that. Most of us reach for a plan. What he's describing is closer to a practice. A few things worth sitting with from this conversation. That not knowing isn't a failure of direction. It's a necessary phase of transition. That the looking period has a purpose, even when it doesn't have a timeline. And that people who come out on the other side with something real are usually the ones who resisted the urge to shortcut it. Next week, loving. Not romantic love, though that's in there too. The Q3 version of choosing. Who you spend time with, what work you take on, what you quietly put down. Richard Leider has spent decades asking people what their life is for. His answers? Next Sunday. If this series is landing for you, share it with someone who is somewhere in the middle of their own Q3. That's who it's for. And these are our 4-quarter lives. For more thinking about the impact of our 4-quarter lives, you can read my column at Forbes and subscribe to my Elderberries newsletter on Substack. Let's design lives that aren't just longer, but better.